Hi, this is David Gilbert again. I'm the strategic program producer for ArtCore, and I've been doing a little bit of a series of films looking at artworks that I have in my house during lockdown. So I'm spending a lot more time with artwork than I normally would due to being at home a lot more than normal. So today I'm going to show you some work which I have on my upstairs landing. So it's not kind of a very conventional setting. I've got quite a narrow corridor upstairs. I'm just going to kind of show you the space actually, which runs down from the top of the stairs all the way down to the end of the room, and then there's a couple of bedrooms at the end. So along this this wall I've got a series of images, 6 images by an artist called Flora Gardner, which I'm going to tell you a bit more about. They're really interesting images, I think. They're all digital prints which are on aluminium sheet, and they form a kind of suite, a set of 6 images that run along my landing here, and all of them are based on images of buildings which have been reworked by the artist Flora Gardner. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about these images and about the project I was involved in, which Flora was a lead artist on, which led to me having these in my house. Flora is a French, half Scottish artist who currently lives in Marseille, but her roots are in Scotland. She was born and brought up for part of her life in Scotland. Flora would describe herself, I think, as a textile artist, and I'd seen some of her work previously in Derby, as it happens, where she'd shown some work in Pickford's house, which were photographs, found photographs onto which she'd embroidered. So that was the kind of textile aspect of it, was this sort of embroidery that she'd done on the images. But I then got a proposal from her for a project I was working on for Arts Derbyshire, which was called Replace. So the project, Replace project, was about looking at site-specific commissions around Derbyshire. So Derbyshire County Council had, Anne Wright at Derbyshire County Council, had done some work previously on whether it was possible to have some kind of travelling exhibitions, visual arts exhibitions, which would move from place to place around Derbyshire and perhaps be put up in libraries, community centres, other public buildings, so that there could be access to contemporary visual art for people in Derbyshire. There isn't really any great provision for contemporary visual arts in Derbyshire other than Buxton Museum and Art Gallery, and obviously they have a museum, so their visual arts programme is kind of relatively small. So this project was mooted, and I pitched for the work and eventually got the role of delivering a site-specific commissioning programme for Derbyshire, as it turned out. So there'd already been a bit of work looking at whether it was possible to tour exhibitions, and really the conclusion was it was expensive, it was complicated, and it was going to be really pretty difficult to do anything with the touring of exhibitions in Derbyshire. So what we decided to do instead was site-specific commissioning to raise some money, which I kind of led on from Arts Council England, and matched that with some money from Esme Fairbairn Foundation, and we commissioned artists to make site-specific commissioned work over a 2-year period all over the county of Derbyshire. So we had a call out for proposals, and what I was interested in really was, rather than getting lots of people who did lovely landscape paintings, for example, or landscape photography, was in something which was a bit more critical of what Derbyshire is, what it's like, and where you know, the kind of place it is really. So where I live, for example, in Birchover, it's quite a small village, and I suppose you would kind of regard it as agricultural now, but is it? I mean, actually there's a quarrying history to the village, so there are 2 quarries nearby, both still working, but very few people actually work in those industries. There is a prehistoric stone circle, a Bronze Age stone circle rather, on the moor, and a whole lot of Bronze Age artefacts, so there's kind of evidence of human habitation going a long way back. There's Roman habitation, for example, so lead extraction during the Roman occupation of Britain and so on. So it's kind of a complex environment, not just a kind of beautiful national park, but a working landscape that's got an interesting history of having been a working landscape in all sorts of different ways throughout its history. So what I was interested in was people kind of dealing with that rather than giving me more images of beautiful landscape. I showed you Alec Finley's work before, and he kind of very much dealt with that notion as well, that there are already enough lovely pictures of Derbyshire. Why would we want to have more pretty pictures? Let's do something else instead. So Flora Gardner was one of the artists who responded to the call out. And she had what I thought was a really amazing idea. She wanted to make a piece of work called One Mobile. So there were some brackets around part of the words One Mobile, around the O and the B of mobile. So you could read it as One Mobile, or if you took out the part in the brackets, you could read it as 1 mile. So what Flora did back in 2010, 2011, was her proposal was to make a 1 mile long piece of gigantic French knitting. So I don't know, I certainly remember doing this when I was a kid, but you got a little wooden loom. You could make one yourself out of an old cotton reel, and you put some nails into the top of it, or pins, and then wound your wool round and round in a sort of weaving manner, which meant that you got a kind of really long sausage-like piece of woven textile. So this is what Flora proposed to do, but obviously on a massive scale, so, with it being 1 mile long. So this kind of completely made sense in Derbyshire, certainly in the Down Valley World Heritage Site, where we have the first textile mill. So she spent actually 4 months in France in her home in France, making this mile-long piece of French knitting, which we then installed in various places around Derbyshire. So we had a really successful installation, I thought, at Cromford, at the main World Heritage Site buildings at Cromford, where we wrapped the 1 mile piece of French knitting around the building, going to and fro between 2 floors, to create the illusion that the mile-long piece of French knitting actually kind of sewed 2 floors together, as if there was no ceiling or floor between the 2 parts of the building. So Flora arrived with this massive piece of French knitting as a huge ball, rolled up into a huge ball, and we then proceeded to install it, as I said. This was the first installation at Cromford Mill, which looked absolutely amazing. In images of the site, it looks very kind of monochromatic, but so this kind of red accent's really, really striking, I think, against the stone of the buildings. At the site of what was the world's first water-powered factory. And of course this was a site of textile manufacture, so making a textile piece and installing it here totally made sense in relation to the site. We also installed it down at Belper in the North Mill. There's an incredible cellar down there which had quite a lot of artefacts in it, odds and sods. It wasn't the main part of the museum. You had to go downstairs into this sort of labyrinthine space underground, which actually floods when the river gets very high, so water rises up in this space. And the installation here was completely different. Here it was like Ariadne's thread in the Minotaur's den. So this was as if it was the thread that Theseus used to get out of the labyrinth of Knossos, having killed the Minotaur. So you can see this formed an incredible sort of mesh type of arrangement in the cellar, a kind of impenetrable maze. So that was, again, a kind of really successful installation, I think, of the piece of work. It was also installed as a kind of temporary performative piece in a couple of places at two Derbyshire festivals. Worksworth Festival, where coincidentally I was actually curating the visual arts programme at the time, so that was a really nice tie-up to have Flora's work come to the festival. And also at Melbourne Festival. At Worksworth, it was kind of really interestingly done. The Worksworth Festival is kind of characterised by this ceremony, or it's kind of the dates run around this ceremony of clipping the church, where the people of Worksworth come together, join hands around the church and form a circle. So the church, which is slap bang in the centre of the old part of Worksworth, was actually kind of wrapped, surrounded by Flora's mobile sculpture, her one mobile, for a day of the festival. In Melbourne, we kind of showed some of this work. We were kind of keen with Flora that we would have some other work we could show in kind of a more kind of static, more traditional gallery type display. So that's how these images came about. This was just something else that Flora had been working on, where she'd been using images of buildings that she found interesting and then doing a cut and paste. These are all vector images, so they are actually from very tiny details that have been enlarged, but because of vector images, they remain sharp in the image. So she created this set of 6 images, which I was quite keen to show, and she also created a wallpaper. So there was a repeat wallpaper, which eventually went back to France with Flora. So I don't have that. But the wallpaper was shown in a number of places, including at Ilkeston. We did a small show in Ilkeston of this work and the wallpaper. So the project, I think, was really successful, and it was great to have these different manifestations of it. I have architecture in my family history, in the sense that my grandfather was actually a very well-known architect. He ran an architectural firm in Glasgow for many years, which built loads of public buildings, schools, hospitals and so on through the 1960s and 1970s. And so his daughter is my mother, and her brother is my granddad's eldest son, also happens to be an architect, and he worked for many, many years in Nigeria, where he worked again on kind of really big public projects, much like his father. So he, his firm designed and built Lagos Airport and quite a number of other kind of major buildings around the city of Lagos and elsewhere in Nigeria. And then 2 of my cousins happen to be architects as well, so architecture is something that's always interested me. In fact, I think if I wasn't a curator, an architect would have been my second choice career, and sometimes I regret not having studied architecture since I have such a strong interest in it. So the architectural motifs of these buildings, I think, are kind of really interesting. We've got the contemporary sort of flats. We have the Notre Dame type of church building, not actually Notre Dame, of course, and a number of other kind of really odd architectural structures. This one I kind of think is particularly stunning, and it's created a sort of seed. She called these sort of rhizomatic structures, so they're almost as if there's a seed with a root. So the root at the bottom of it is kind of trying to find its way into the ground so that the building can organically grow from that seed. And that's kind of what's happened with these images. The building has grown like Topsy, as they say, from this quite bizarre seed into a massive structure, an impossible structure, which is simply a kind of repeated image of the same building, cut and pasted together, beautifully arranged, and then printed out as these fantastic images. So I see these every day. My bedroom's down at the end of this corridor, so if I'm walking from the bedroom to the bathroom or heading downstairs, I will see these images every day. And during lockdown, I've spent a lot of time looking much more closely at some of the work that I have in my house. Sometimes you get a little bit, not blind to it exactly, but it becomes part of the background rather than something in the foreground. So it's been a pleasure for me, I think, to revisit some of the work that I have in my house and to look at it more closely. So I'll put a link to Flora's website so you can see some of her other work, and there's a really interesting interview with her where she talks about her textile work, particularly the work with found photographs and the one mobile piece which I think she thought was quite an unusual, certainly very unusual piece for her, a bit of a departure from her normal practice in terms of scale, and kind of radical piece of soft sculpture, as she calls it. So there we are, Flora Gardner's work. I hope you like it. I certainly love having this work in my house, and I hope you've enjoyed me sharing it with you. So hopefully I'll see you again, and I hope you're surviving lockdown and finding plenty of art to look at, both in your home and online. If you are looking for some art online, you can of course see Artcore's exhibitions if you visit Artcore Gallery. We've got a fantastic exhibition by Naho Matsuda and Neil Willis, which Error and Power, which is residency from home, where we ask the artist to work rather than in our residency space, to work from their space. So it's our first ever remote residency. And we're also launching a blog which looks at John Newling's work. John Newling is a Nottingham-based artist whose work is very much about our relationship with nature, and we'll be showing his work much later in the year. We hope towards the end of this year at Artcore Gallery in Derby. So visit the Artcore Gallery website and follow John's blog, which will unfold over a long period of time as we look at his work, which is so essential as we are locked down now. It gives us a view into what the future might be and how our relationship with nature needs to change in the future if we're to continue to survive as a species on this planet. So that's a jolly note to end on, but it'll be a fantastic exhibition, and I hope you enjoy seeing John's work as much as I'm looking forward to it.